I Call Your Name is a very funny and quite light-hearted Cheers episode. This is the third episode of the third season, directed by the wonderful James Burrows. And the reason I highlight that it's quite light-hearted is because we've basically had 4 episodes, the last episodes of the previous season and the first 2 episodes of this season, where things have been really intense. They've been wonderful episodes, but not very funny. And it's really nice to have an episode where things are just a little bit lighter and a little bit easier going. And it's an absolutely delightful episode. As always, I will go through the various plot points, things that I liked, particular highlights that I found funny. So there will be spoilers for this episode from this point on. And it starts off really wonderfully with Coach getting very excited about going to an RV show with Carla's date. And clearly the date was not going well. And she managed to convince Coach, not that it took much convincing, to go to this show. Really funny opening, very light-hearted, really thoroughly enjoyed it. We also have a joke quite early on that took me a second, and it's the joke, I won't give the punchline, but it's where Diane says Frasier is making a mountain out of a molehill, and Carla's joke, her retort in response to that, I just thought was brilliant. So Diane's not in the best of moods, and we do eventually find out why, and I'll get to that in a moment. But first of all, I noticed quite quickly that things don't seem as awkward between Sam and Diane. I can watch them in a scene together without feeling like somebody's going to say something or somebody's going to fly off of the handle. I think very quickly they've been able to re-establish Diane working at Cheers without things being too awkward. And I think that's really great. I think they've got the tone there spot on. The chemistry between them is still there, but it's not uncomfortable the way it has been in the last few episodes. And I really appreciate that. I'll get back to Sam and Diane in a moment, but part of the main narrative focuses quite delightfully on Cliff. I love Cliff. Something I've mentioned quite a lot is that I love how, as the seasons have progressed, he's become a more prominent character. And by season 3, he's definitely one of the main cast. That wasn't so much the case in the beginning. And we really get to see some great acting from John Ratzenberger here. And he is worried that he's worried he's going to be killed because he observes Lewis, played by Sam Scarber, taking a perfume sample from a magazine before delivering it. He's a fellow mail carrier, and he's worried that Lewis is going to find out he was the person who told on him. And I think the performance there is great. The narrative is great. I think Cliff was fantastic. I do love Cliff, and I just think his stories are generally always, a little bit strange and a lot of fun. And I really loved how that played out. I think everything worked really, really well. My opinion, and this is purely my opinion, and this is of course a spoiler, as I said, spoilers for this episode, but when Cliff confronted Lewis at the end, and Lewis didn't open the piece of paper, I believe Lewis knew it was Cliff. I believe he deduced from Cliff's behaviour that it was him. I'd love to know if anybody else feels the same way, or if they think Lewis was just deciding it wasn't the best decision to open it. But personally, I believe he realised that it was Cliff, and he could see just how sorry Cliff was. That's my reading of it, and I'm very happy with the direction it took. Okay, so Sam and Diane. It's a little bit awkward because Frasier tells Sam about a patient who has called out somebody's name in the bedroom. And I feel like it was very obvious that he was referring to Diane for 2 reasons. 1, Diane was in a mood and we didn't know why. And 2, Frasier would never talk about another patient or talk about a patient to somebody else because that's not allowed. He's not allowed to do that. So I think it was kind of obvious he was referring to Diane when he was telling the story of Thor and Elektra. And I feel like Diane responded very comically but very believably when she found out what Frasier had said. It was very cheeky of Sam to reveal to Diane what he knew, because in doing that, he was telling Diane that Frasier had given away an intimate, embarrassing secret. And it was very cheeky of Sam and very naughty, and clearly he wanted to stir things up. And I think it shows that, on the one hand, he was trying to, annoy Diane, but at the same time, there's this playful quality, and he's having fun with Diane. If he wanted nothing to do with Diane, he wouldn't have mentioned it. He would have just forgotten about it, just treated her as an employee and nothing more. And I think that that's a really interesting insight into how he still thinks he can behave around Diane. And I think it worked very well. And Diane, what she did ultimately, loved it. Very intense ending, very funny ending, and again, very playful with Diane. And we do have this very playful relationship that's kind of fueled by bitterness, but it works really well. And I enjoyed that part of the narrative as well. The only thing I didn't like about this episode, and it's not really something I didn't like, but we didn't get that much Norm. I don't even think we got a Normism, if I remember rightly. We didn't get a lot of Norm at all, but that's fine. It's not a Norm-centric episode. Ultimately, a really brilliant episode, and one I really thoroughly enjoyed. I Call Your Name, very funny, perfect tone after, coming off of the back of 4 pretty intense, very intense episodes, and an episode that I'm sure I will always really thoroughly enjoy.